next 2 weeks, even though we're in the middle of our worship emphasis, and talk about vision. And I can tell message notes, when always message notes always goes up. It's phones. I think it's me, and then I realize no one's taking pictures of me. We were in the middle of our worship emphasis, and I was getting ready to teach actually the Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, of the beginning of Lent. And I hope all your Lenten season stuff is going well. But I felt the Lord press on me this verse and to talk about vision a little bit. One, for some clarity purposes. Two, to estimate and work on our gaps as a family, as a body. And just to speak some life into what the Lord, I think, wants to do in our house and be prepared for that. So we're going to do that over the next 2 weeks. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And hopefully it recharges you and resurges you and kind of gets you geared up as we finish out Lenten season, move into Holy Week, and move into spring and the summer, if spring ever comes. I want to start tonight by showing you a couple of pictures. You can put the first one up if you're done scanning message notes. And this is not a Q&A, so Brian's not preaching. Don't respond verbally. But does anyone internally know who this is? Other than Stephen, I would say most of you probably say no. I'd say about 70. Oh, you know. Most of you probably don't know. Hopefully it really helps the example I'm trying to build here. Let's go to the next one. I don't know if any of you know who this person is. Beautiful British man. This is one of my heroes, actually, and I can't tell you how much I love this man. Does anyone know who that is? Not a clue. That's good. It's good. One more. Let's do one more. Do you know who this guy is? No, this is not a local accountant. This is somebody important, I promise you. Does anybody know who this is? I didn't think so. Let me show you one more. Tell me if you know who this is. I think everybody knows who this is, right? This is another incredible man, right? Steve Jobs. Very interestingly enough, if you'll go to the next one of the three men, this is Steve Wozniak, this is John Ivey, and this guy on the end, his name is John Lasseter. For those of you that don't know, Steve Wozniak was the actual person who actually built the first Macintosh computer. You may be shocked to know this, but Steve Jobs barely finished high school, right? Steve Jobs couldn't build like a Palm Pilot, you know what I mean? Had no technical ability at all. I'm talking at all. So this is Steve Wozniak. He actually developed a lot of the early, the Macintosh computer, the first Mac laptop he was involved in. I don't remember if you know this, but Apple originally had almost like a Palm Pilot they called the Newton. I don't know if anybody remembers a Newton. I own a Newton, not because it was my time, but just because I love weird old technology. And lastly, this guy over here is John Lasseter. And John Lasseter he just kind of retired in, I think, 2020. But John Lasseter, from its inception until 2020, was the lead writer, CEO, and head of Pixar. So John Lasseter oversaw things like Toy Story 2 and 3, Cars, WALL-E, Monsters, Inc., all those things you can he was involved in all of it. And actually, when Disney purchased Pixar from Steve Jobs, Bob Iger's one stipulation was that if I buy Pixar, I have to have Steve Lasseter. And Steve Lasseter became such an important role that he actually took over all of Disney animation and Walt Disney Pictures. And so, really big figure, really big guy. His kind of last big crescendo, his last big project that he loved was actually Cars and Cars 2. And he was actually a lead guy on Cars Land. I'm getting way off from my point here. I say all that because I find it very interesting, and I think about this all the time. These are three men. I didn't talk about Johnny Ivey, did I? I totally skipped him. I went straight to John Lasseter. My bad. Let's go back to the middle on Johnny Ivey. Johnny Ivey is the lead architect and design engineer of the first 9 iPhones. That sleek, nice look that Macs ended up having when they kind of quit being chunky, and iPhones and iPads, and that kind of silver back with the black inline, all of that. If you ever watched a video of an Apple presentation, you heard like a milky, nice British voice, it was the guy in the middle. He now runs his own company handling design, advertising, and architecture for things like Bugatti and Lamborghini and kind of these bigger brands. Johnny Ive is kind of considered the father of modern day technical design and bringing that kind of sleek, finished, almost mid-century modern look to it. And so he's a really big hero of mine. If you're ever interested, I'm not being sarcastic, he has the greatest voice on the planet. I mean, the greatest living voice on the planet. Go, just type in Johnny Ivy. It's Jony. It's not 2 N's, not an H. Johnny Ivy, and just fall asleep. Just fall asleep to it. It's literally he sold more iPhones, I think, with his voice than they ever did by the technology. It's milk and honey. But it's funny because these guys have played an extremely large role in our zeitgeist. They have, in a large way, really been a part of the fundamental things that we use and have now. Like the design and look of this iPad, like this is here because of the way he did what he did. You know what I mean? Like Apple wouldn't exist without Steve Wozniak. Pixar would not exist without Steve Lasseter and his ability to understand what animation means. Most people don't even know that when Steve Jobs got fired from Apple, the next thing he did was start an animation company called Pixar, which was the first company ever to use computer animated graphics in animation. They're the first non-hand-drawn company. Most people don't know that. And so it's very interesting that these people play such a large role, and yet when I put up a picture of Steve Jobs, everyone's like, oh yeah, that's the guy. That's Steve, right? And yet Steve is this figurehead, and we have all these people under him, and it's very interesting, and I think we have to understand why we don't understand these people the way we understand Steve is because creation is always first made up of vision. Vision is the gasoline that propels anyone or anything. It actually gives vision life. Right? You have to have vision to bring anything into existence. You have to, anyone that started a business or started anything in their lives, they have to have a vision for it. This goes back all the way in time. This goes back so long. I remember back in the day, you used to even have to have a vision for your MySpace page because you could have a wallpaper and a song that described you, maybe 2 songs. You could have your top 3 friends, someone maybe you liked in there, and you had to have a vision for what your MySpace page looked like because that was going to describe who you were. Mine was a full picture of Tom Brady throwing a football, so that was me. That was Noah. And I don't want in any way there to be like a layer of narcissism when talking about vision and understanding that there's someone sometimes who's charged with casting vision and people who are a part of making the vision possible because it's all one living organism. But at the end of the day, there's a great challenge in the world because most people are living without a unified vision in their church, in their family, in their home. How many couples genuinely sit down and plan out maybe their year together or their lives together or their finances together or anything like that? Plan out things for their children or for things they want to do for the future. Like how many people actually think about things like that? Me and my wife I've started the beginning process of trying to plan a trip for us to go to Japan. And we're planning on going in 2027, and Bailey's kind of like, it's really just not that important right now. I'm like, if we don't plan it now, we'll never go. So we have to plan it now so that in 2 years, we don't have to think about it, and we can just go, right? You have to have a bit of like a gap to prepare for anything. And there's this hard reality where people don't understand that they're hungry, I think, and I believe they have ideas, but vision gives people with the same hunger and ideas a shared force in which to enact those values in the world. That's what vision does. I think most people have the desire, hopefully in some way, to see the world change a little bit. Maybe if it's even in their own small circle. Hopefully they have something that they want. And most people have a hunger, but they don't have anything kind of in the aspects of a vision to circle around that and lead them forward. And that happens no more to me than in the church. The church can get caught in this very quickly. Here's something that I find very interesting. I'm noticing a lot, kind of in the Western church world, is what churches get caught in, and what I don't want us to get caught in, is it's very easy and it's very quick for people to get behind a person and not a vision. Like and I don't think in any way there's anything wrong with getting behind a person. One of the things I really love about our church is the amount of just support I have as your pastor. Like I feel like, there's some of you, if I said like tonight we're gonna start drinking ram's blood, half you would leave, but the other half would be like, Doug would be like, I'll try it. I'll give it a go. I'm not driving tonight, I'll do anything. I'll try. And so like in a way you're excited, and I really do, like I love that. And I watched my parents live a life with a lot of people behind them. And I think sometimes what happens is we support someone super well, but we don't grab on to the other half of the pie, which is the vision of that place. And if there's one thing I've kind of learned in the small life that I've lived, is that supporting a leader without a vision can easily create a focus that is inward, just like supporting a vision without a leader can quickly create chaos. So often if we support a person but not a vision, what happens is we will gather around a person, and when that person is not there, there is no enacting of the culture, right? You know what it's like when you're, like when you see a kid running and then they catch their parent's eye and they're running, and then they kind of like, that person's come back around, the culture's changed. But when that person's not around, they have their own values. They have their own ideas. They have kind of their own plans. And the same thing happens the opposite way. Sometimes churches are really good at vision casting, or businesses are really good at vision casting. And what happens is there's no one to ever put the blinders on each side that make you go like, not over there, not over here. And so everyone takes the vision, kind of morphs it into their own thing, and we have tons of subsects of an idea of a vision everywhere, instead of everyone being unified. And really, what made the early church successful, what makes a lot of great moves of God successful, is an agreement between a leader and a people group on them as their leader, and a shared vision in which they both agreed to enact. That is really where, in my opinion, the rubber meets the road. And so a couple weeks ago, the Lord took me to these verses in Habakkuk. And I want us to kind of use these in some ways as a springboard into understanding. I really felt like the Lord a couple weeks ago took me into this idea of be love in many ways being in three Genesises. I don't know how to say Genesis plural. Genesises? That sounds okay. Genocides, that's not right. Genocide is something way different. We're not going to bring genocide to anybody. But three separate Genesis as a family. And I want to make this really clear. I really need you to understand this. You may not notice this when I preach. I really don't use the phrase, the Lord told me, very much, if ever. I really find those words really, really weighty. Like normally you'll notice in the summer, I'll probably won't preach for, a couple weeks, and I will mainly be focusing on getting with the Lord about 2026 this summer to prepare for next year. And that's really when the Lord speaks to me. And then after that, it's kind of like Noah and the staff and just kind of carving it out. And so like, I don't really sit behind a Bible every Monday and I'm like, all right, Lord, what do you want to say? You know what I mean? Like I'm in prayer, I'm interacting with them, but a lot of this is just me giving you, based off the overall vision, kind of detail. So I really hold a lot of weight when I say that I felt like the Lord told me. And so I don't want to use those words, not weighty. And I really felt like what the Lord was showing me this week was this idea of 3 separate Genesis that we have kind of been in as a people group and that we're coming out of. And for some of you, you're newer here, and so this may mean nothing to you tonight. Some of you may be considering coming and being here, and so this would be a good night for you to hear things. And some of you have really been here quite some time, and so it may affect you in ways it doesn't. Another thing I want to make clear, and I talk about this a lot, I want us to understand that Habakkuk in this verse it is not talking to us. This idea of make the vision clear so that they can run with it. This is to Israel in the time of being persecuted by Persians and soon to be Babylon. And Habakkuk is frustrated because he sees Persia, who is hurting at the time, Israel, and he sees Babylon on the horizon. And so he's angry with the Lord. And he comes to the Lord basically saying, aren't you going to do something? Basically we get this kind of prophetic, really Habakkuk reads almost just like Psalms in a lot of ways, where Habakkuk will say something and he's angry and then the Lord will respond. And then Habakkuk will say something because he's mad and the Lord will respond. It's very similar to David. I'm angry, I'm mad, Lord, why haven't you redeemed me? And the Lord speaks. And so this is very similar, but there are moments, and this is the caveat I give anyone, there are moments where the Lord takes the scripture that was not meant for you and says, for this moment, for this time, this is for you. This is meant for you in this moment. And that's what I've really felt from the Lord with this scripture. And really, it's really about verse 2 and 3. And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. So that he may run who reads it. And what I felt like the Lord was showing me about our church was this idea of 3 Genesis that we've been living in as a family. And here they are, slavery, wilderness, and a people group. Some of you have been a part of Be-Love since its inception as a whole. And what I really felt Be-Love was built on was a people group leaving a form of what I consider Western slavery, which is denomination, and leaving that and kind of saying, we'll choose the unknown, right? Like the easy thing, if I can say anything about my parents as leaders, the easy thing would be to sit in their really big church with their really great incomes and just kind of wait it out. Just kind of wait it out and just go, you know what? Someone else will take this and we'll just take our retirement and peace out later, right? And there's a real moment, just like Israel, to choose to say, we'll choose what's uncomfortable and leave. And anyone who was in the bathrooms of our own building knows that we chose uncomfortability. We chose nothing but uncomfortability. I'm pretty sure that's where COVID started, was in our bathrooms at that old building. It was disgusting. And poor Jason had to clean them. So everyone go pray for Jason tonight. But I really felt like we came out of this moment of denominational slavery and moved really into this season of wilderness wandering, of kind of unknown and uncomfortability as a family. And you're trying to find your footing. We're meeting on Thursdays, and we're meeting on Fridays, and we're meeting on Sundays. We're meeting on Sundays at 6, and we're meeting on Sundays at 4. Most of you don't actually remember Thursday nights. Then Friday nights, then Sundays at 6, and then Sundays at 4. I remember all of them. But we were kind of trying to find really the gap of how we fit into our city, and kind of figure out what that looks like and kind of how that is, because God knows, like, Chattanooga necessarily didn't need any other churches. Like, we got a lot. But we knew there was something there. And then what I felt like has been happening recently with us since we moved into this building is we've been moving more and more into a people group. And I felt like the Lord gave me these 3 looks at the people and the nation of Israel. And really it's very interesting because in slavery, Israel is basically nothing. They're just an enslaved people. They've lost their way. They don't really understand the scriptures. Really, things like things like Abraham and really Isaac and Jacob and all those things have kind of all started to fade away, right? And all these stories are kind of fading out of them, and they choose the wilderness. And here's what's interesting, is Israel really, in the Old Testament, doesn't become a people group until they have the law. It's really the law that makes them something that they weren't. The law does a few things. It gives them a shared set of values. It gives them a vision for the future, and it gives them a place to worship. They have the tabernacle. They have a set of structures in first the 10 commandments and then the 600 laws that man adds after that. And they have a idea of a place they want to be and a place they want to go. But until they receive the vision of the law, there really is nothing that is combining this people group. And throughout the Old Testament, it is always the law that weaves them back together, right? When they're destroyed in Babylon and they go away and they come back and they find the law, what do? They weep. Because they realized they weren't Israel. This law made them a people group, right? This law made them different. There's a reason why they couldn't fit in with Canaanites. There's a reason they couldn't fit in with Babylonians. There's a reason they couldn't fit in with Egyptians. It's because the structures and values of who they were counter to the cultures around them. And unfortunately, often what happens with Israel and all kinds of people groups is they lose the values and the visions of what makes them a people group, and they can eventually fall off from who they are. That's basically what the whole Old Testament is Israel forgetting who they are and Jesus or the Lord having to come in and kind of go, remember me? Remember this guy? Right? The Father doesn't even want them to have a king. He wants to rule them himself. But it's these three markers of who they are, of slavery, of wilderness, and the law. And what I feel like the Lord is moving us into is really kind of the completion of who we are as a people group. I had a very interesting conversation when Stephen first moved here. We just kind of sat down and began talking about the church and kind of what he would be doing and just all of our structures. And I started kind of sharing with him where Beloved was at, kind of as a people group. Because for me, really, like the last 3 years for us and from the pulpit and kind of the way we've been teaching has really been about kind of deconstructing walls and ideas and theologies kind of built around legalism, and then doing the best we can to kind of rebuild them to reflect the kingdom image, right? The past couple of years have been kind of about really rooting out shame. Rooting out legalism. I remember the first time I said the statement, "You're as righteous as Jesus," didn't go over well. Everyone kind of looked at me like they were about to kill me. But Dad was pastoring then, so I was like, deal with him. But at the end of the day, these were the things that really, for us, it was about cultivating. It was an internal world. It was about rooting out any pieces left of legalism that would say, you get to have your way here. And really, that's kind of what we have been building towards over the past couple of years. And I was telling Stephen this, that, for us, one of the reasons that we have never really emphasized like a missional lifestyle as a church in any way has and really have never put that in our language has been because I believed that we needed a certain level of health. We've needed a certain level of health. At the end of the day, if you bring an orphan in and everyone else is an orphan, it's not good. You know what I mean? Everyone ends up kind of, I don't know a safer phrase to say other than the nuts end up running the nut house. And really what's hard is oftentimes churches do a really bad job, and not, I don't think on purpose, they often do a really bad job of outpacing their awareness of their own identity and their ability to disciple. That's a really big problem in the church. Most of us outpace the understanding of who we are. So when 20 people come in and they're trying to go, what's beloved identity? You go, you have to wait till Sunday. I don't know. Right? What do you mean more righteous is God? I don't know. Ask him. So what happens is we consistently live in a world of outpacing ourselves. And what I feel like and what I'm beginning to see is that as a family, in my opinion, I really, really, really feel that Beloved is at a place of reaching a level of health as a church that we must begin to adopt more of the aspects of our vision than we have. I really, really feel that we're a healthy church as far as the people we have. And because of that, I need us and I want us to move into some of the other gaps that I'm finding in our vision. And I want to take these 2 weeks and really challenge us with the ability to understand what that means. And I feel the Spirit saying that it's time for us to be able to run a little bit more with the wholeness of our vision as a church and just run the race, to make it clear and let's go after it, okay? And so we have some slides we're gonna go through tonight, and some of this may feel a little logistical rather than like super revelatory, and we're just gonna go through it together as a family. So here's the first one. Here's Beloved at a 10,000 foot view. We have a mission, we have a culture, and we have a purpose, right? Our mission is built on believing, becoming, and sharing the good news. The cultural pillars we use to be able to do that is identity, presence, and mission. And our purpose, and you can find this on our website, in Church Center, it's Beloved Co. was founded to be a kingdom family-based community rooted in practicing the way of Jesus to bring the values, cultures, and hope of the good news and the kingdom of God to our city and our region. This is us. If you want to know, like if you want to cut us open and look at the depth of who we are, this is what you should see. This should be the focus. And our mission is really focused on the idea that what Jesus, Paul, and the apostles did and what they gave us was the good news of a different and new kingdom here and now. That's what the good news is. The good news, the gospel, really is a new incoming kingdom that is available now. And our goal as a body and as a church is the ability to believe that that's true and become enough of a person who believes that that's true, that not only do we bring it into our city, but we share it with the people around us. This is really who we've been hopefully leaning towards and building towards as a church. And this is really why we follow this process. And for me and for us, this entire process is really built upon these cultural pillars that we call our culture. And you can go to the next slide, which is identity, presence, and mission. Identity, presence, and mission. And if you'll see, I'm a really big fan of Venn diagrams. So most of our stuff's always going to be Venn diagrams because I think they tell an incredible story. But if you'll see in our beautiful Venn diagram here, our goal as a church is to be a spiritually formed family. Is to do everything we can to be a spiritually formed family. That's our goal in our city. This mission, this culture, all these kind of catchy statement and phrases that we use to attract the eye is really built upon this idea. And these three cultural pillars, and I kind of view, has anyone seen kind of the new 3D imaging they're doing of the pyramids? And I think it's in somewhere in Egypt. And now they're starting to see that they may be built on these massive pillars with cylinders in the middle. And that maybe what we're seeing is the top of a pyramid, and really it's like thousands of feet or whatever under the ground. And so they're using these kind of 3D image scanning, and people are starting to wonder that maybe this is real. And kind of in my brain, how I picture Beloved is that we're the pyramid, and these three cylinder pillars that kind of hold up, or should hold up, who we are is identity, presence, and mission. Identity, presence, and mission. This should be the things that hold us up. First is identity. Identity is our value of self. This has been what we've been hammering away for 3 years, is that you are a son and a daughter. You're as righteous as Jesus. That you have been made in the image of the Son, and God only sees you through the lens of Jesus, which means he sees you perfected as you will be. He sees you as seated in heavenly places. And your goal now and your identity is not becoming something, it's learning how to become what you became when you got saved. You have a full bank account, and your job now is to learn how to spend it, right? We move into presence, right? And presence for us is the value of our gathering. Scripture is very clear that where 2 or 3 are gathered together, he is in the midst. And as a community, as much as we value ourselves being like Jesus, we value gathering to encounter the manifest presence of that person. And lastly is mission. Mission is our value for being sent out. There's a little thing, if you read the 4 Gospels, it's kind of at the end, you might miss it. It's called the Great Commission. It's kind of kneecapped there at the end of all 4 Gospels. Not a big deal. But it's kind of the whole thing that we're all called to do is mission, is to be this kingdom to our city, to our region, and to our world as a whole. And if you'll look very interestingly, and I won't say it was planned this way, but maybe it was planned this way. But if you look very interestingly at the next slide, our mission, nope, keep going, the other way. Boop, keep going, identity, presence, mission, one more after mission. You're almost there. One more. Okay, let me say it in French. One more. There we go. Praise the Lord. If you'll notice, our mission and our culture almost identically mirror each other. They almost identically mirror each other, right? So in the same way that we are meant to believe the good news, that really is about understanding your identity. To believe the good news is to believe that you have now been made in the image of Jesus. That's what the good news is. And there's a new kingdom, right? Presence is about becoming. When we become the good news and we gather around the presence, we are becoming the kingdom that we believe that we belong to and are here to bring. And the same thing goes with mission and sharing. I mean, those two kind of speak for themselves. But really, if we look at all of these things together, this mission and this culture, you're going to know one thing. I'm not that smart. This is just the early church. Like I'm not Steve Jobs, so I didn't come up with this totally on my own, right? Einstein has a really great statement. He says, a genius is someone who's really good at hiding his sources. That's what a genius is. And my sources are just the scriptures. And so all these 3 things are for us are mirrors of the early church and finding a way in the 21st Western world where we get our groceries online and delivered. How do we model this? How can we model the early church in some way that feels somewhat resembling and close? And really, these 3 things represent what the early church valued most, which is discipleship, community, and renewal. Discipleship, community, and renewal. These are 3 words you need to beat into your head. Discipleship, community, and renewal. The Christian life is built, the Christian vision for living is built around discipleship, community, and vision. Brian uses this statement all the time, but these 3 things, these cultural values, should be a part of what we would call our core beliefs. This is what makes a spiritually formed family. Because let's be honest, there are a lot of churches in our area. There's 42,000 denominations, right? If you go to Cleveland right now, there's the Church of God headquarters, and a half mile down the road, there's the Church of God of Prophecy headquarters. I don't even know what the difference is. I couldn't tell you. But they're literally right next to each other. Both of them have a bookstore. Don't know. But there's a ton of churches. And honestly, there are churches that, in my opinion, do things worse than us. There's churches that, in my opinion, do things better than us. There's churches that do things different than us. And there's actually some churches in our city that do things like us in a lot of similar ways. And we would even find some similar language with. But what I don't see in our city, and this is not about anyone else, what I don't see in our city is a lot of spiritually formed families. I'm not seeing it. You know how I know that? 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now. 3 weeks ago, a man walked into his ex-wife's house in Lafayette, shot his ex-wife, shot her boyfriend, shot her father, and shot himself. The church has done about anything with that, right? Maybe if we had a couple spiritually formed families in our city, in our region, would stuff like this be happening? Would there be a place where people could find a certain level or amount of healing that they would choose a different path? Because that's what the gospel did for generations. The largest empire in the world was Rome. And it took the gospel maybe 200 years for it to become the national religion. That's like easy work. Paul changed basically like 7 states, what would be considered now, of Rome. 12 dudes plus Paul got enough people together to believe in the same vision that Christianity is the largest religion in the world by a wide margin. We are really big. We're all divided and subsected because we have no vision. But we're a really big overall arching religion. Like, it doesn't take Christianity long in purity to affect a city. It just takes people carrying enough of the same vision long enough, dedicating themselves to the same goal to see it happen. That's what everything from the end of Luke to the rest of your Bible is about. Shared vision, shared values, and a renewed kingdom. One thing I want us to understand in this next slide, just because I think sometimes we can get these things out of our head, but all of these things are built on cyclical cycles. So we will never as a community or as a body graduate from believing and learning more about our identity. We'll never graduate, right? I've been preaching on the righteousness of God for like 4 years. It's kind of my niche. And I've probably got it down maybe like 4%, 5%. Catch me in traffic. I'm not as righteous as God, I promise you. Be a bad day. It's why I don't have a Be Love sticker on the back of my car. So no one's going to find me. So these are built on cyclical cycles. We'll never as a body go, great, we've got identity down. We really believe it. Oh, great, we've really got becoming, we've really got presence down, and we're really got sharing and mission down. They always return to each other. We never stop growing in these things. These aren't pillars that are on themselves individual. Rather, they're 3 things in which we kind of live inside of an echo chamber of. Is everyone familiar with echo chambers? You can get caught in your own echo chamber where, sometimes like your own Instagram social media feed becomes your own echo chamber. And so all your stuff is only focused on this one thing. And then you find out something else happened. You're like, I had no clue. It's because all you like is this thing, right? That's kind of the idea, is that we live in this echo chamber of believing and becoming and sharing and believing and becoming and sharing and believing and becoming and sharing, and identity and presence and mission, identity and presence and mission. And we live in these cycles together. That's what the church was, okay? And so I want us to look at 3 things, because this is where, you can go to the next one. I really feel like this is where we are at as a family. And sometimes the good part and the bad part of my job as a leader is to examine the vision which has been cast and determine 3 things. Are we getting it? Is it plain? And where are our gaps? Right? Where are our gaps? Really good leaders don't just come in and kind of tell people what to do in a business. They look for cultural gaps, and they just try to just infuse the culture back into people. And that's really kind of where I feel like we are. And so this is kind of where I feel like Be Love is as a whole. I really feel like we've really got believing and identity as a church as much as you can on a normal basis down. Like we talk about the difference of an attractional model church and a discipleship model church, because we're a discipleship model church. The attractional model is built on 3 things. I should quiz you because I've talked about this 3 times, but you probably don't know. The attractional model is built on being Sunday-centric, they're personality-driven, and they're preference-based ministries. So everything's built around Sundays, everything is built around one man and his personality, and everything is about building enough ministries around people's personality types and preferences to keep people in the room. right? Discipleship model churches are built upon the idea that what you do is you bring people in and you do stuff with them really slow and really long and really hard. It's not sexy, not a lot of free t-shirts involved, but it does really build good believers. And so what I feel like we've done really well is believing in identity. I feel like if you start coming to Be Love, it would almost be impossible, unless it's on your own volition, to not be discipled, to not learn about who you are. It would be by your own choosing to not ask for it. That's where I feel like we are. One good thing that I feel like is happening is I really do believe that what we are believing is what we are becoming. I believe more people at this church now have a greater lens of understanding how to root out shame than ever before. If I threw some kind of weird liturgy on the screen right now, or weird scriptures around the idea of we should all feel really bad about being sinners, everyone would kind of be like, hold up, we've been talking about that. Everyone would kind of, all the hopefully signposts in your brain would begin to flicker. But here's one of our gaps. One of our gaps is what we are becoming is not often leading, in my opinion, to the equal amount of hunger to gather and experience the manifest presence of what we're becoming. I really feel that. And then, so really for us, becoming is going upward, but it's never cycling back into presence. And then what, in my opinion, is almost non-existent in our church is missional formation. I would say that missional formation is in almost every way non-existent. And I don't mean missional formation from the place of program. Like we talked about Welcome Home tonight, that's not what I mean. That's where you sign up, you come be a part. That's something kind of built, it's a structure built around. I'm talking about a lifestyle of missional formation where your life resembles enough of the Christ that it becomes attractional enough to talk to people about the Lord. It's once again, if you look at the back of the four Gospels, normally the last chapter, it's called the Great Commission. It's a really great section, you should check it out. Normally like verse 47 to 52. But this for me is where I feel like we are kind of at a non-existent point. We're going to talk about missional formation next week. That's kind of my hope, is to talk about and work through what it means to be missionally minded and for spiritual formation to lead into missional formation. But for the rest of tonight, what I want to do is talk about the gap that I feel like we are experiencing in the process of becoming, not producing a value for our gathering. Of becoming, not producing a value for our gathering. I've been recently reading a book and listening to a series about the second century church. There's a really great book about it called Resilient Faith by Gerald Sitzler. It sounds weird, I know. Gerald Sitzler. There's a really great book called Resilient Faith, and he talks about the process of what it took to get saved and put into the church in the second century. So for a good portion of when the church really was great and fiery and doing what it was supposed to be doing. And I kind of want to show you this and walk you through this process. I'm realizing we might be here for a little bit. But here it is. So in the second century, Stephen come up and said he wanted to be a Christian and join the church. I'd say no. But if Brian came up to me and said he wanted to join the church, this is the process that he would have to walk through. So first, if Brian wanted to join the church in the second century, Stephen's not joining the church. But if Brian wanted to join the church in the second century, the first step is that he would need a sponsor, or what back then would be called a catechumen. We don't have any catechumens here. But if Brian wanted to join, let's say, Be Love in the second century, Doug would have to bring Brian to me and the elders and say, hey, listen, this guy wants to be saved. He's a really great guy. I vouch for him. I believe he wants to be a believer of the way. So I'm going to put my neck out for Brian. And we'd say, are you sure, Doug? And he would say, yep, I like Brian. Doesn't end well. No, I'm kidding. So after that, what happens is Brian's interviewed about Brian's life by the elders of the church. Brian's interviewed, kind of trying to understand who he is, what's going on, his processes. Then after that, the elders of the church and sometimes the deacons would visit Brian for 12 months. And every time they visited him, they would read through and go through the Gospels, while doing that, also practicing and performing deliverance on him. So running through the process of what the four gospel means, what Jesus' teaching were, and trying to get out all the demons and all the stuff that's in Brian, because there's a lot. You should talk to him. It's rough. All the stuff that Brian still is dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But once that 12 months was over, what would happen is Brian would be allowed into what's called communal participation, which means that he can come and kind of watch and see what the church service is like. He can't participate fully, and he can't say he's a part of us yet. Like, he doesn't get the t-shirt. So like he can't put us on his Facebook profile, can't do nothing. You're still way over there. Okay? So we're a year in. After communal participation for up to 6 months, Brian would be allowed or would be asked to be invited into salvation. And there would be a baptismal service, another moment of deliverance before the baptismal service. And then everyone would celebrate. And then Brian would be welcomed into a service for his first time getting to participate in communion. Communion was like, lock it up. You don't get to eat it. Children weren't allowed to take it. Non-believers, you couldn't walk into a church service and just have communion, right? People died back in the day. So communion was very, very, very sacred. After communion, there was something even more sacred, something that wasn't even in all the texts of the early Bibles. Brian in the 2nd century church would be brought into a back room with just the elders, and he would, for the first time, be given a copy and shown the Lord's Prayer, the secret sauce of the church. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. This idea of this weighty thing. And then Brian would officially be integrated and allowed to say he goes to Be Love after about a year and a half of this. And then after that, Brian's new task was to become a catechumen himself and bring other people for sponsorship into the church. Now, let's just look at that process and our process now. Would anyone like to raise their hands and receive salvation? No, I'm just kidding. Bit different. It's a bit of a different process to join the church back in the day. I don't think this was because the church desired to be like a speakeasy, but because they knew the value and the importance of what it was. And there's two things I want you to understand here. Look how many steps are before communal participation. Look how many steps are for communal integration. Do you know why that is? Because the early church saw almost nothing more valuable than gathering together. Nothing. 4 things the early church believed was so sacred that you could hardly talk about: communion, baptism, the Lord's Prayer, and their gatherings. Like, you couldn't just walk into a gathering. You couldn't just come in and sit and go, I'll see how kids' church is. Now, the bishops of the 2nd century church eventually got mad because they felt like their churches weren't growing fast enough, and eventually, throughout the age, changed this process and basically turned this entire process into a 6 weeks thing they call catechisms, which we'll be talking about in a couple weeks, actually. But at the end of the day, I want you to understand that what they valued almost the most was gathering together. Here's why. Because how can we release a kingdom we are not immersed in? How can we release a kingdom we're not immersed in? There's a really cool place. My sister's really into Japanese culture, and I've actually been oddly really getting into Japanese culture. It's a whole story. But she goes to this thing every year on her birthday called H Mart in Atlanta. And basically, it's like walking into this giant building that's basically like Japan. It's like walking into like a downtown street area of Japan where there's, tons of noodle bowls and sushi and all these different things. And basically, like, when you're in there, basically you're in Japan. And like, if you want to know what it's like to be Japanese, You can go there as much as you want every day. Get you a bowl of noodles, get you a couple things of sushi, grab a Hello Kitty blanket, whatever you want. You feel as Japanese as you want to. Now, at the end of the day, there's an interesting thing where when you're in places like this, there's almost a moment in your head. I feel this every time I go to Epcot. There's a moment in your head where you go like, am I in Japan? Like you're sitting in Norway in Epcot and you're like, is this actually Norway? You're eating caramel corn in Germany and you're like, this is real, isn't it? Except for Canada. They do Canada horrible. I don't even know what that is. But there's this moment where you're immersed in this culture where you could almost leave and go like, I get it. I'm a part of it. I feel it in my bones. And that's what gatherings were. The early church valued them so much, they did them daily. Because they understood that being in each other's presence created a culture, a structure set. As much as living in places like Little Italy or Chinatown, they lived and immersed in something so much that when they went out, they knew who they were because of who they were when they gathered. That's the idea. The scripture in almost every place talks about that spiritual formation is a two-way coin, both in the secret place and in community. No one is formed spiritually only in the secret place without community. It's a model of life that Jesus had. It's a model of life that Paul had. It's a model of life that they all lived. Jesus would live in that cyclical cycle of he would go to the secret place, often withdraw, be in community, and then go talk to sinners and withdraw and be in community and talk to sinners. And Paul would go to a church, be with a church, travel in isolation, and then go talk to people who were sinners. And they lived in these cyclical cycles. And this is what this idea is. And I think one of the hardest problems we're having in the idea of missional formation is because at the end of the day, it's a hard enough effort just to gather. It's hard enough to clear our schedule long enough Sundays at 4. How in the world am I going to think about missional formation? We've lost a bit in our vision, not just at Be Love, but as a church for understanding what it means to be in the room together. There's a reason why the Islamic faith is growing leaps and bounds. It's because the people who join take it very, very, very seriously. And it's hard. Like I personally practice the offices of prayer. I pray every morning, I pray at 12:30 in the afternoon, and I pray in the evening. And that's really hard. When it's 12:30 and Benjamin's eating a snack and you're in the middle of Lion King, it's really hard to pause it, put him down, he's mad, and you're trying to say the Lord's Prayer, and they're screaming everywhere. I'm not saying it's not challenging. But at some point, there has to be an equal amount of value for gathering to the equal amount in which we want to see ourselves, our families, and our city changed. And the hard part is it requires vision. Without a unified vision pushing us forward, we will subsect into divisions of commonality. If we all don't come in with the same vision, we'll come in and we'll find 6 other people that like the worship, and we'll find the 8 other people that like when Dad preaches, and the other 2 people that like when Brian preaches, and we'll find all these little subsects. I'm really poor Brian. It's my love language, just making fun of people. So no, but we'll find all these little subsects, and we'll just kind of live in that. We'll just kind of live in our little things. That's what people love about. I was literally talking. Me and Bailey have started inviting couples in our neighborhood to Be Love, which is scary because I get the mail in my robe a lot, and so thinking of pastoring people who see me like that really freaks me out. But we've just been. I don't really know a lot of unsaved people, so I've just been inviting people in our subdivision, and I heard one guy, and he was talking to me about just the struggles of church, and I mean, this is literally what he said is like, we really don't like our church. We really don't enjoy it, but we love our small group. It's like, stay where you are. No, I'm kidding. Don't come. No. But at the end of the day, that's what happens. When there's not a unified vision for a group of people, they will often divert themselves into subsect groups that have their own values and structures, but they all are somewhat connected to one thing. And it's great and it's awesome sometimes when you find people similar to you, but you'll never change a city. You'll never grow really generationally in that manner. It won't lead to the value system in what you're thinking. And at the end of the day, it has to be built on a vision, because vision builds culture. And we can have tons of strategy, but there's this great line from Peter Drucker. And it says that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that's just the truth. Culture will eat strategy for, you have no idea. One of the things that for me is like, I'd rather pull like my eyelashes out one at a time than do, is to like when we get to planning events at Be Love, and it's like we run through all the little tiny things that we're trying to do to be strategic. Well, if it's too late, little kids won't come. And if it's too long, we've got to have nursery. And if we don't have this, people won't like that. And if there's not enough food and we don't have this, and this thing's not at this time, and people can't talk to these people, and we don't have these things. And literally, we'll talk for 3 hours building out strategies, because everyone has their own personal preference that if it's not met, won't show up. It won't show up. Just the truth of it, right? And at the end of the day, no one shows up even when you do the strategies, because it's not a culture of it. So you provide childcare and it's basically Benjamin in there. Or you plan a certain event and you hope you have enough food, people bring this or people do that or people do this, and it still doesn't happen. There's not enough of a unified vision in us to say that what we value is gathering. That what we are becoming, that what we are believing, we are becoming, which leads to presence. Because when we gather, where 2 or 3 are gathered, he is in the midst. And there's this crazy idea that we can gather when it preferences us well and become spiritually formed. And it's not legalism and it's not shame, because I hope we've entered into a verbal contract that what you want is to be formed into the person of Jesus. And if you don't have to come. You can watch online. We got a great live stream. Right? Really, watch online if that's not your goal. At the end of the day, my belief and my hope is that what all of us are here for is to be a spiritually formed family who are moving the needle of formation in our city. And we do that by how we gather. You know why people travel thousands of miles, hundreds of miles to revivals and revival services? It's because there's a big group of people gathering where Jesus is going to be. It's kind of just that simple. At the end of the day, it's just that simple. At the end of the day, what people are hungry for is a people group who are hungry for the Lord. And what my fear can be is, as we make this push as a church into missional formation, what my fear is that a whole new set of people come here looking for a spiritually formed family and find half of them here once a month and the other half here the other half of the month. And what ends up happening is people are trying to connect with someone that they see second week of April, and then first week of May, and then third week of June. Like at the end of the day, I know, I get it. It's hard. I know I do this for a living. Doesn't make it easy. I have a kid. Benjamin has missed his second, third, and really early on, 4th naps every Sunday since he's been born, because we're here. And if you think putting a baby to sleep after missing naps is fun, it sucks. It's miserable. And every Sunday night for the first 6 months Benjamin was alive, it was like we were constantly restarting. But what was I going to do? Stay home, Bailey, it's fine. No. This is where we value to be. This is what we value to do. And what happens is it can become super challenging when we're trying to cultivate something in the day in which we're living, because life can get lost in the hectic nature of it. We have children's jobs, entertainment. We're constantly fatigued. We're overworked sometimes. We have tons of preferences. And in today's world, there's a belief that everything lives to serve me and I function out of what makes me happy and rested. And what often, unfortunately, can happen for all of us is we lose the vision and the value of what we're trying to do in the monotony of existence. If you've ever read the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, almost every letter between Screwtape and his apprentice demon is not about getting people to sin, it's about getting people to become busy. All of it is about getting people busy, getting people caring about economics and politics and this thing and that thing. Busyness, as I've stated what feels like 100 times, is the great enemy of the spiritual life. We are always finding ways to become busy. We're always finding things to do to add to our schedule. And then as we try to create any time for spiritual formation in our lives, we go, well, I just can't this week. So I joined that online poker club. Maybe that's you. Maybe the Lord's speaking to you tonight, poker club. But what I do believe, honestly, and I don't want to give some type of pastoral rhetoric that sounds overhyped and bloated to produce an emotion or reaction in you. But what I do believe is happening is I believe we are being uniquely positioned and we have been uniquely placed as a church to be a part of what the Lord is doing in our city and in our day. I really believe that. It's not fake to me. I genuinely believe this is what Be Love is here to do. We've been sent here for this cultural moment. I think it matters what happens, right? And unfortunately, what will create what we hope for in our church, our cities, our families, and our community is carrying a unified vision for what church should be and what our city should be and what our future should be. This should be one of the scariest facts in the world to you. Stats by Barna now show that parents who attend less than 90% of yearly Sunday services see a 10 to 20% drop of their children attending church generation after generation. And that's hard. That's 46 Sundays a year. That's a lot. I think if we all were here 46 Sundays a year, we'd look like Jedis, but that's a challenge. If you fall under that place, not me, statistically, your kids will go to church less than you do. Right? How many of you, if some of you grew up as like just Christians your whole life, parents in church, the whole jazz, how many of you remember how often you were in church as a kid? Felt like every freaking day. We had 2 Sunday morning services, 1 Sunday evening service, a Wednesday service, and Friday night fire. And I had to be at every one of them on the front row. Right? Every stinking one of them. How many of us honestly, though, and don't raise your hands, just think about it internally. But how many of us honestly are that dedicated compared to where our parents were? If we think about it. How many times a week are we in the building comparatively? Because I honestly think me and Abby would probably be 2 of the worst humans alive if it wasn't for being in church all the time. You know, God had to do a real work in the both of us to be able to exist in any way that looks or resembles Jesus. But my hope is, and my goal is that I want us to create a culture and a shared vision that doesn't die with us because we refuse to gather. I want something for my son. I want it for yours, but selfishly, I want it for mine. Because I grew up in church pews. I grew up where you couldn't even write on a tithing envelope without getting beat. So I had to sit on the front row with nothing. There was no Miss Rachel. No iPad, no headphones, nothing. There was my dad singing the same chorus for an altar call for 2 hours. It's miserable. Miserable. Here I am, pastoring. Right? And I want us to do something that leaves something for our children. And here's the lie sometimes we believe. Sometimes people have spent their whole lives raising their kids in church, and their kids aren't in church, and they're going, well, that didn't fix my kids. And most of the time, that problem is actually because the internal existence you created in your home didn't match the person you were creating at church. Most people's kids aren't in church who attended church their whole lives because of personal hypocrisy in their home, not because of what happened in the building. I know this is I know, it's not really joyous, but it's just the truth. At the end of the day, my parents weren't perfect people. I watched my dad read scriptures every day. Every day. Apparently she did not. I'm kidding. I watched my dad study the word, read the scriptures every day, pray every day. And I watched my mom do that about once a month. I'm still here. No, I'm just kidding. But I watched my family do that. And so oftentimes what we can do is we can associate the dysfunction and deconstruction of the generation under us based off, even though we were in service, they didn't do anything, but yet at home, there was no actual spiritual formation. We just went to church. I went to church with tons of kids whose families just went to church. And I would stay at their house and come home and be like, Mom, I'm never going back there. You know what I mean? Like, they smoke. I'm not going back again. That was a big deal in the 90s. You couldn't smoke. But my hope is that I live long enough to see not just Benjamin, but Benjamin's kids in church, right? I have lived long enough to watch almost every Sunday Braden's kids sit next to their grandparents. Half of them are asleep, but they're here. We'll deal with them as they age. But I want us to create a value for being together into a place that it creates such a value in our kids that it's all they know. The whole time I was living my worst life, I went to church every Sunday. I know that's probably not a good thing, but that's just what I did. You know what I mean? That's just what you do. That's probably not right either, but it was so ingrained in who I am. That's what I want for our people. And there's a gap I'm finding in the vision of believing, becoming, and sharing, where it's going to be very difficult to be missional focused if we don't have a value for being in the room. Because if you missionally share who Jesus is to someone, and they say, well, I really want to go with you, and you go, okay, I'm going in 4 weeks. It's not going to land the same. Jesus has changed my life, and I'm planning on being there on Easter. You should come with me in 4 weeks. Doesn't land the same. And at the end of the day, my hope, at least my dream, is that we have a value for our city to become a spiritually enough formed family that our city becomes like the kingdom. For me, that's not rhetoric. It's a real goal. Let's stand. I know I went over. I'm sorry. I tried not to. It won't take long. Very soon, Easter will be here. And then after that, 4th of July will be here. And then after that, the fall and the holidays will be here. And if we do not watch ourselves very, very, very carefully, what will happen is life will blow by us. Life will completely blow by us. And all these things that we're talking about, all these things that we're trying to ingrain in ourselves for our children and grandchildren will pass us by. Right? Because the new year's gone. All the spiritual disciplines we were going to do in January, for most of us, are probably all past. For some of us, all the things we said we weren't going to do on Lent, we're probably doing. All the sugar we weren't going to eat during Lent, we're eating. And what happens is life becomes a very quick cycle of boom, 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 boom. And you start missing once, you start missing twice. The vision leaves you once and it leaves you twice. And spiritual formation becomes this figurative thing that lives up there but never becomes a part of your reality, because you're going to do it at Easter, Then you're going to do it after 4th of July gets over. And then when fall comes, you're really going to get active. And you're really going to start some disciplines. And then Christmas is here and you're too busy. And the new year comes and you finally have some resolutions to do it. But then by February, your kids are just being your kids again and you're not doing it again. And that happens year after year after year. Like, I don't know if this freaks anyone out. We're in April, basically. How did that happen? We were just in January. Happened in 2 days, it felt like. And that's how life is. Jesus saying life is like a vapor is not a way of saying, just wait, it's going to suck, but you'll get over it. Jesus saying life is like a vapor is saying, harness every minute. Harness every second. And what I really want us to leave with tonight and next week is hopefully enough of a recharge in us to see a value for gathering that will lead to a value of deeply spiritually formed people who become missionally formed in how we view our city and the people around us. I want it to become a part of who we are. This is what I wrote, that I believe what the Father is looking for in this cultural moment, in this one, are people groups that are willing to cultivate unified vision and union inside of a current day Babylon that worships isolation in itself. The God of today is isolation. The God of today is that you can do everything at home alone. That's the ruling power of the day. Everything comes to you. Every couple months they're on the verge of saying that movie theaters are going to shut down simply because people just watch their movies at home. So they don't even have to leave their own house to watch a movie. Everything is about isolation and individualism. That's the current Babylon in which we live. And the lie is that community is exhausting. But community is actually the thing that creates a culture and a vision big enough to tackle a city for the kingdom. That doesn't mean you don't go on vacation. It doesn't mean you can't get sick. It doesn't mean if your kid has the flu, come to church. Don't do that. But what it means is that on the mundane, regular times in the week, when you know that the community that you call home is gathering, do you value that? It's just a proposed question, no force. So here's my challenge to you this week before the prophetic altar team comes up, is to take time in the secret place and in the presence of the Holy Spirit and take our vision in there with you. Take our vision into the secret place. Ask what participation looks like. Ask the Spirit to give you vision and dreams inside of our vision as a church. Ask the Spirit to create in you a hunger, and maybe even the hunger that you had first when you first got saved. Remember when you first got saved and you couldn't be kept out of the building? And you were falling out in the Spirit all the time and everything. And now it's like, oh God, 4 o'clock. Ugh. Remember that first thing that was like, all I do is sit in prayer all night? Maybe see if you can just grab a hold of that again. Timothy Keller has a really good line. It says, a common vision can unite people of different temperaments. And what I don't want us to leave with tonight is the common misconception or lie that we can believe when we give challenges like this, that when we say we need a common vision, it means that we have everything in common, because that's not true either. We can only thrive if within our common vision and goal, we allow diversity of thought to thrive. And we have to be in like mind in our vision, but we have to be in diversity in how we accomplish it. And so the goal here is not that we all think the exact same and act the exact same, because some of you are hands and feet and chests and heads and hair and every other part of the spiritual body. This isn't about having everything in the exact same thing. It's about having the same vision, believing in the diversity of every role we play in bringing that. Amen. Let's close our eyes. I'm going to invite our prophetic ministry team to come up as they give us time to minister around the altar tonight.